Let me just tell people on WhatsApp that the YouTube streaming is not working. Okay. So let's go ahead and.
We are in 4-3, Rabbi. We already did 4-2.
Yes, we did 4-2, which was our lovely boat discussion. Scroll down. I think I can make that a little bigger and still see people. All right. So let's go ahead and get the story rolling. So for chapter 4, Mishnah 3, we are going to begin a discussion. It's a bit of a carryover from 4.2, but it's a different topic of what happens if you are stuck outside the Shabbat limit. And then we're going to do a bunch of different permutations of that. So just again to remind you, we're talking here about the tehum, about the distance from your residence, your city, excuse me, in which you can travel outside of Shabbat. This is not a carrying Eruv. This is a walking Eruv, right? So that if it's Shabbat, and even if you're not carrying anything, you only have 2,000 amot outside of your city, about 3,000 feet outside your city. And yes, we will eventually talk about how we measure what the city boundaries are. But for the moment, just remember, you've got this extra buffer. But what happens if you are beyond even the buffer? Everyone have the
feet, you say?
What's that, Natan?
2,000 feet.
2,000 amot. So it's about 3,000 feet. Just under a mile.
Okay.
Actually, it's pretty close to a kilometer.
Really? Oh.
Yeah. About. I mean, this is very, very approximate. All right. So let's go ahead and read our Mishnah. And actually, I was using Sefaria last time because I've found that there were some issues with the copy. So just a second here. Let me open up a quick Sefaria window. Because I noticed that when I tried to copy it out of the Sefaria, some of the text was not accurate. So we're just going to take a quick second. I've already donated. And go to Mishnah, Eruvin, chapter 4, Mishnah 3. So that's the amazing thing about Sefaria is I can actually open that up faster than I could if I were to go to my bookshelf. Just a remarkable piece of property. All right, program. So let's go ahead and get the screen Mishnah Eruvin with English. There. Everyone seen Sefaria with me? Was that a yes?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. I just need some signs of agreement. It's the really difficult part about not being in the classroom when you can't see people's faces so easily. And right now I've only got Natan, who's looking very red. You must have an interesting bulb in your lamp. But that's okay. It's at least I can see you. Everyone else has their video off. I guess they're all studying in their pajamas. Okay, so one who went beyond the Shabbat limit with permission and was then told that the act had already been performed. Okay, so what are we talking about here? What we're talking about here is that, let's back up one more step. The eruv around, the tehum, the limit that you can walk into. Remember, that was a rabbinic limitation. That was something that the rabbis put in place in order to keep people from violating the Torah. Now, if there are emergencies, there is a fire, there is somebody whose life is in danger, then you can go past the border and you're not violating Shabbat. However, what happens if while you're out and you find out that you are no longer needed? Let's imagine you're a firefighter and you hear that there's a fire you grab yourself and you go running off to go out to the farm that's past the border. But before you get there, you meet someone else who says, oh no, the fire's already put out, it's okay. Well, you're already past your limit. What do you do? Now, normally if you are, go ahead.
Sorry, which limit? The city limit or the limit of the city plus the 2,000 amount?
The city with the 2,000.
With the 2,000, okay.
Yes. Right, so you had your city, you have the area around it, and you've already gone past that. Now, normally somebody who's out here, they're in no man's land, right? And that's obviously not where they made their Shabbat location. So normally in that circumstance, like we talked about, if someone had been carried there against their will, they would only have 4 amot, right? About 6 feet around them. So what happens for this person? They were going for a good reason. Are they just stuck? No. He is allowed to move within 2,000 cubits in any direction. And if he was within the Shabbat limit, it is as if he had not gone out at all, right? And we'll come to the last sentence in just a minute, right? So what they're basically saying here is, if you've even gone past your normal Shabbat tehum, you can't go all the way home again, yes, but you now have a new area around your new location. Does that make sense, or do I need to draw?
That makes sense.
Okay, right. So you have a new area in your new location. Trying to make sure it's it. I clicked annotate by mistake. There we go. Okay, so you have a new location based on, you have a new radius of 2,000 amot based on your new location. And 2,000 amot in each direction means 4,000 amot total. That's like 6,000 feet, like 2 kilometers. That's not a bad area to spend your Shabbat. It's not what you wanted, but at least you have some place to go. If you hadn't even gone out of your limit, then it's like you never went out. Now, remember, we talked about in the earlier chapters, if you have your normal Shabbat limit of 2,000 amot past the city, and you want to extend it, you can make an eruv at the edge that gives you an additional 2,000 amot, but it takes it away from the other side of the city, right? You shift it in one direction by making this extra eruv of tehum, of your boundary. So you might have thought that because you were going further and further past the boundary, because you were going to go, or you wanted to go further than the boundary to go help, that you would have been moving the boundary from the other side of the city to go with you. And then when it turns out you're not needed, that you would have lost that extra territory because of your intention. But no, says the halacha, if you haven't actually left your 2,000 limit, then you are still considered as every other member of the city, and you have the full 2,000 amot in every direction around the city. You didn't disassociate yourself from the town, even though you were planning to go beyond the edge of the town. And we'll understand why after the last sentence, right? All who go out to save life may return to their original places. In the extreme case where you know you're going out to save life, to fight in a war, if you're a medical professional and you're doing CPR or something, the rabbis made a special leniency to make sure that nobody would be worried about going out on Shabbat. If they were saving a life, not only are they allowed to go, but they are allowed to return. And that extra part of returning is the important one, right? Of course, you have permission to go, but the rabbis are giving special permission to come back. And indeed, in the discussion, they even make it clear that you are allowed to come back, for example, if you're a soldier, even with your weapons. Because if you left your weapons out, then God forbid another attack happened, you would now be defenseless. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions on Mishnah 3? Just scroll through the explanation on the side in case anybody's watching this on YouTube and doesn't want to go to Safari itself. You can just hit pause if you want to read them. Okay. Moving on to Mishnah 4. Let's move this up to the center of the page. Cool. And get our things there. Okay. One who sat down on the road at dusk right? Or we're talking here about Erev Shabbat, and Erev Shabbat means before Shabbat begins. It's very important to remember that always. Nowadays in common conversation, when someone talks about Erev Shabbat, they're usually talking about the time of the evening of Shabbat when Shabbat has begun. Halachically, legally, Erev Shabbat is the time before Shabbat began. So you're sitting at the edge of Shabbat, and you basically, what happened is you thought, I'm in the middle of nowhere. Right? I'm in the middle of nowhere, so what am I going to do? I guess where I'm sitting, this is my location. I wasn't able to get to the town, so this becomes my Shabbat location. Then Shabbat begins. And then you stand up, and maybe you walk a little bit now that you have your Shabbat area from where you are. And you didn't realize it, but he got up and saw that he was near a town. The halacha is that he may not enter it by Rebbe Meir, since it had not been in his attention to do so, right? The words of Rebbe Meir. Rebbe Meir says, no. He planned to make Shabbat on the side of the road, and when he gets up and realizes his mistake, that he actually was within 2,000 amot of the city, but maybe there were too many trees, or maybe it was a bit of a hill, and he just stopped where he was. Too bad, you didn't think about it, you didn't plan it, you don't get it. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, says he may enter it, meaning that you actually, because you were within the boundaries of the city, meaning that 2,000 buffer zone, you are considered to have the same privileges as the other members of the city. And therefore you can enter and use its territory as usual. And Rabbi Yehuda brings a maaseh, it brings an actual event. Rabbi Yehuda said it once actually happened that Rabbi Tarfon entered the town, even though this was not his intention when Shabbat began. And of course, bringing proof from any of the actions of the sages is always good proof in an argument.
All right, this is a huge loophole because I can have not intention and oops, by mistake, I'm here. So it's like giving a lunch card to everyone, like really to go over and say, oh, it wasn't my intention, I didn't realize. Because it's something very personal.
Not exactly. Hold on. I think this one I need to draw because I think it's a little unclear what I was trying to say here. All right. So there's our city, right? And then our city has a boundary. And just imagine that square, right? I'm not a draftsman anymore. So where is my person? Okay. So we have our traveler. And our traveler is coming to the town, but when he comes to the town, he stops there. He thinks he's outside the city limit. He thinks he didn't make it to the city zone because there are too many trees, there's a hill, it's dark, he can't see the town. I mean, it's not like nowadays where light pollution will show you the glow of the city.
He's in the boundaries.
But he is technically in the boundaries. And so that's why Rabbi Yehuda and the sages agree that he is allowed to act as though he is a member of the city. Even though in his mind, he thought he wasn't, because it is a mistake, because he actually is, he is treated as though he was in the town and knew it all along. But if, hold on a second, I think I need to go to another button. But if he stopped here on the side of the road and thought that he wasn't going to be able to get into the city, that's a different circumstance.
Right. What happened if he continued walking by mistake? He was lost and moved to the area of the 2000 after the Shabbat.
Right. So let's go ahead and we'll continue on the conversation. I'm going to go ahead and leave the map up because I think we may need this again.
Hey, Rabbi, I have a question, just out of curiosity.
Yes.
When two sages are arguing, how come when they use the example of another sage, is there like a standard of when you can use a different sage? Because Rabbi Meir is pretty high up as far as giving opinions go. And I mostly see Rabbi Tarfon, I don't see him quite as often.
Right. So it's not always clear how the different sages rank in the fantasy football league. There's actually a very long discussion of that in many of the different texts that came after the Mishnah. But giving a precedent is more powerful, because one of the things that will happen in the Gemara in particular is when there is a disagreement among the Tanaim, among the sages of this generation, then people will often say that they interpreted it differently, that they had a different, that they didn't mean what you think they meant by the words you brought as their teaching. It's a very, very common discussion point in Talmud. But when you have an action, then you can't say they meant something different. So it's not always that that sage is a weightier opinion. It's simply that it is a harder to dismiss opinion, because the action is much harder to reinterpret. They do still sometimes reinterpret, don't get me wrong. And they'll say, no, there was a special circumstance, a special way of understanding it, etc. But a maaseh, an action, an incident, a precedent, is always more powerful than just one opinion.
So do actions count for more than words, or verbal opinions?
They are more stable than words, right? The whole issue with the Mishnah in the first place, and why there needed to be a Talmud, was that words are often misunderstood, and words often need to be interpreted, and words often can be interpreted in many different ways. And much of the Talmud is devoted to refining how those words should be interpreted. And much of the time that interpretation seems quite contrary to what might have been thought was the plain meaning of the words of the earlier sages. So it's not that the actions count more, it's simply harder to shift them to another position in order to reconcile them.
And is that partly because the Hebrew is more ambiguous than how we read it in English?
No, the English is absolutely ambiguous too. And in fact, in many ways, English is more ambiguous than Hebrew. It's simply that you're more familiar with English and think of it as being secure. But I would have thought, Aaron, as a lawyer, as somebody who makes a living out of trying to ensure that words are precise, and also noticing that when words are not precise, that there is opportunity for understanding it differently, that you could commiserate or at least sympathize with what the rabbis are trying to do here.
Right. No, I mean, I get that, but I just thought, like, when there was ambiguity, I thought the translator tried to clear up the ambiguity through reading the Talmud and other.
So that then becomes a great question of how do you translate Mishnah? This was actually a big topic in our first year of rabbinic school, because most translations of Mishnah and most commentaries on Mishnah will use the Talmud. And I will absolutely confess that I am guilty of that. And I hope that Dr. Cohen, my first Mishnah teacher, forgives me, because I know that many of my students are interested in where the halakha goes from the Mishnah, not just in the Mishnah itself as a layer of our history. But the translator has to decide, does he or she try to translate it into English or use the commentary to guide you to the Talmud's ultimate conclusion? Or do they translate it just as plain Hebrew and let you recognize that there is ambiguity in the text, and that understanding it without a living teacher who had learned it from his teacher, who learned it from his teacher, and so on, is nigh impossible? And we were put into the second camp when I had first year rabbinic school and Mishnah. We were not allowed to look at traditional or classic commentaries that referred to the way the Talmud would handle it, and instead could only use straight dictionaries or commentaries that dealt with the Mishnah only as the Mishnah itself, and not reference the Talmud, which was hard. We actually had to work very hard to find an edition of the Mishnah that had commentary that was self-contained. For those interested, I can send you a link to the book, although I wonder if it's still in print, because quite frankly, it's not very popular to study Mishnah like that.
Right. So most of these English translations are interpretive translations, so they're less ambiguous, right?
Like every translation of every book ever. Right? It's a translator's job to remove ambiguity that the author probably intended. But as we talked about when we first started doing Mishnah, and as I've mentioned in a few other different classes, not the Mishnah course itself, the Mishnah was never meant to be read just by one person sitting alone, staring at a computer screen. It was always meant as a shortcut way to remember what your teacher had explained to you, and just a very condensed way of understanding the full explanation. And what we do when we get together is we basically try and reinflate it to its full meaning. But if you were studying Mishnah in the classical way, you would memorize this with what we had studied live in your mind as what it meant. And you would hold both of that together. Well, if you were a good student. If you were a bad student, you'd end up arguing with everyone about what your teacher had said. And we've seen lots of that throughout our history. All right, oops. Mishnah 5, I believe, is where we got. So, Mishnah 5, if one slept on the road, so now you fell asleep and was unaware that night had fallen, he may move 2,000 cubits in any direction. Okay, so let's go ahead and move our guy. Oops, I'm in the wrong button. Come on. Nope, I don't want that. Sorry, put that back up there. All right, too many buttons on the screen. So let's move our guy. This is a slightly different case. Now, he fell asleep in the middle of nowhere. And when he fell asleep, he didn't notice that Shabbat was happening. Maybe he fell asleep in the afternoon, thought he had plenty of time, but he woke up and realized, wham, 3 stars are out, Shabbat has already begun. So according to our first sage, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, he now gets his own private, and that was really poorly centered. Imagine this box is the same size as the other box. Well, roughly. He gets his own little 2,000 amot box in every direction. Right? 2,000 that way, 2,000 that way, 2,000 that way, 2,000 that way. He becomes his own mini city. Right? He has this is his Shabbat place, and so he gets his Shabbat tehum around it. Now, the sages disagree. Right? The sages say no, he only gets the 4 amot, right? 6 feet total. Right? So if you're in the middle, it would be 3 feet, 3 feet, 3 feet, 3 feet. Now, what is the issue here? The issue is that he didn't intend to make this a Shabbat place. That's why the sages disagree. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says everybody would intend that wherever they are is Shabbat if they're going to end up in any place on Shabbat, that it would be sort of an automatic thing, that would be your intention. Now, you were just talking about the ranking of sages and individual voices. So you may be excited to hear that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri actually wins this argument. So even though it's a single voice against the sages, the way the Gemara works out the discussion, Rabbi Yochanan is actually the one who comes out on top of this.
So he said that he has 2,000 feet, 2,000 and more, not only 3.
Exactly, right. But you'll notice where we are here, right? His 2,000 amot does not overlap with the city amot, so he cannot enter the city.
And what happens if they overlap?
Hold on. We have to finish all of our other examples before we get to that. Let's finish the second half here. Rabbi Eliezer says that the man is deemed to be in the middle of them, meaning that you have 3 amot up. This is for the sage's opinion. 3 up, 3 down, 3 left, 3 right. Sorry. I keep getting confused between amot and feet. It is 2 amot up, which is 3 feet, 2 amot down, which is 3 feet, 2 amot left, which is 3 feet, 2 amot right, which is 3 feet. So 4 amot total, 6 foot total. Rabbi Yehuda says he may move in any direction he desires, and Rabbi Yehuda agrees that once he chooses his direction, he may not go back on it. So Rabbi Yehuda says no. We're just going to change this for the sake of our discussion. All right, we're going to move this. He says, you're absolutely right. The box is at the edge of the person, but he can decide where he wants his box to be. If he wants his 4 amot to be to the left, he can be on the left. If he wants them to be to the south, they can be to the south. Right? He can pick where he wants his amot to be. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer says, nope, when it happens and you realize it, your 4 amot surround you already. So Rabbi Yehuda is giving a little bit more choice in the direction that you would pick your 4 amot to appear. Okay.
But we learned that he has only 2 amot, and not suddenly 2,000 amot if you are by yourself in a field. That everything that we saw before. So now we change everything that we learned before.
So this is why I said I keep dabbling in bringing in where the Gemara goes with this compared to what the Mishnah is, right? So I generally prefer to study the Mishnah as the Mishnah. I think that it's healthier to look at the Mishnah as the Mishnah before learning Talmud, because if you try to learn Mishnah as Talmud, you might as well learn the Talmud. It's a little bit quicker, I suppose, than learning the Talmud where all the digressions happen. But if you really just want to get to the halakha, go read Rambam or Shulchan Aruch. But every now and then I know that my students are eager to know the score, and so I will drop in certain references to the sugiyot. But I don't always do that. All right. There we are. Okay, so next case. Now we've got a couple guys who are stuck outside, right? So now think of these boxes as being our 4 amot boxes. So 2 men, some of whose cubits enter into the cubits of the other, may bring their meal and meet them in the middle, provided that this one does not carry out anything from his limit into that of the other. All right, so let me get my selection button. What we have here are 2 guys. I wonder, will this let me resize it? Hey, look at that. I can actually shrink it down. We got 2 guys.
We came back to 4 amot or 2,000 amot?
We're dealing with 4 amot now.
But you say that is 2,000 amot.
I said the Gemara says.
Okay.
Right, so in the Mishnah, we haven't gotten to the point of settling the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and the rest of the sages. So at the moment, you just have to pretend that Rabbi Yochanan hasn't won.
And why did he won? What was the Eruvin in Gemara why he won?
I don't want, if we save that for Sunday. If you want to ask me that for our Sunday class, we can do that.
Okay. Fine.
Right, if we want a Talmud shiur, we'll do a Talmud shiur, but let's stick to Mishnah for right now. Okay, so we have 2 guys. Each of them, each of them have their own 4 amot block, but they overlap in the middle. So the question becomes, can Mr. Hart bring something into this portion, which is part of his square, and can Mr. Star bring something into his portion, which is part of this square? Can Mr. Hart then enjoy whatever Mr. Star brought, and vice versa? And what the Mishnah says is yes, as long as Mr. Star doesn't take it back into his territory and Mr. Hart doesn't take it back into his. Right? If they happen to have something in their territory, they can share it with the other person, and that other person can use it in the overlapped slice that they share.
So, Rabbi.
Yes.
Like an example of this would be like travelers stuck in between cities.
That is the precise example that we're dealing with here.
All right.
Or, 2 people that were carried off and were left behind and got stuck outside. Okay, but now let's just make this a little bit more complicated. Put Mr. Star back over here. Now we move on. If there were 3 men and the prescribed limit of the middle one overlapped with the limits of the other. All right, so now let me make sure his box is brought. Oops, come on. So much easier with the whiteboard. I need my markers again. All right, boom. And boom. Okay, so once again, we have Star, we have, what do I need? Well, we'll have Mr. Question Mark. Okay, there we go. So now we have 3 people, Heart, Question Mark, and Star. and question mark is in the middle, and his territory overlaps star to the right and heart to the left. If that's the case, he is permitted to eat with either of them, and either of them is permitted to eat with him. But the two outer persons are forbidden to eat with one another. So Mr. Question mark can go over here and share with Mr. Star in this zone, or he can go over here and he can share with Mr. Heart, but he can't take something from Heart and move it over and share it with Mr. Star, and vice versa. They can only exist in their overlapping zone. Rabbi Shimon said, to what is this similar? To 3 courtyards that open one into the other and also into a public domain. If they made an eruv for the outer ones with the middle one is permitted with them and they are permitted with it, but the 2 outer ones are forbidden access to one another. So rather than thinking of these as people with 4 amot around them in the wilderness, think of these as being courtyards. And the courtyards are, the middle courtyard made an eruv with the left, and the middle courtyard made an eruv with the right. But that means that right and left can't share with each other, and the middle courtyard can't take something that was shared from the right and share it into the left. Meaning everyone would have to keep track of everything and where it came from.
But why? Because the guy in the middle can take everything back wherever he wants, because both areas are in his field. So he can mobilize all the stuff wherever he wants in the middle.
Right, but the way the kavanah, the intentionality of the eruv works is only that which was possible to be within your zone at the beginning counts as being within your zone. And since for Mr. Hart, nothing from Courtyard Hart, nothing from within Mr. Courtyard Star's territory could have been in his territory, then nothing that Mr. Question mark brings over into that courtyard would be valid.
But they can share, for example, they can meet in the middle, the 3 guys, and share all the food.
They can meet in the middle and share, but the 2 outer ones cannot share.
The what?
The 2 outer courtyards cannot share with each other. They
can share with the guy in the middle, each of them, but they cannot share between the 2 opposite sides.
Exactly. Which is why, of course, it's better to have an eruv that covers all 3.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, they didn't. But that's just an analogy in this situation. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that because the drawings are driving me mad. All right. Let's move on to, let's move on to Mishnah 7. Come on, stay there. The one thing that I don't so much like about Safari is it always tries to guess which verse you're looking for commentary on. So if you mouse over or scroll up and down, it'll change your commentary window sometimes before you want it to. Okay, see, like that. Okay, and because I zoomed in for the benefit of other viewers, I have less real estate on the screen. One who was on a journey, and it became dark, and he recognized a tree or a fence, and said, "Let my Shabbat place be under it," he has said nothing. All right, so here's our situation. You've got a guy, and he is coming towards his home, and he is looking and going, wait a minute, I'm almost home, but I'm not going to get home, at least at my current pace, before Shabbat actually begins. But because I'm traveler, I can make my Shabbat zone, my 2,000 amot, from wherever I am. So I'm going to make it from that tree way up there, right? I'm kind of throwing my marker ahead of me. So that way I'll be able to walk another 2,000 amot past it. Following his logic here? With the idea being that after he gets past that extra 2,000 amot, he'll be able to be home. right? That will get him back into his city. Following? Good. But if all he says is, let my Shabbat place be under that fence or under that tree, it is legally invalid. If he said, let my Shabbat place be at its root, that works, right? He may walk from the place where he stands to its root, a distance of 2,000 cubits, and from its root to his house, another 2,000 cubits. Thus, he can walk 4,000 cubits after dusk. So what is happening here? What's the difference between under the tree and at its root? The commentators point out that this is an argument over the specificity. That if there's a large tree and you say it is under the tree, which part under the tree? Under this part of the tree? Under that part of the tree? Under this part of the tree? There are lots of points that are 4 amot zones that could be put under the same tree. And the same thing with the fence. So by saying at the root, then you've narrowed it down to a specific 4 amot block, and that becomes your anchor. And now that anchor can get you an additional 2,000 amot. And Aaron raised his hand. Thank you for raising your hand.
Thanks. Rabbi, 2 questions. How come he doesn't have to set up an eruv like they did before with the food and when he's pointing it out? Because he's not there yet.
That is coming up in a couple Mishnayot about making an eruv by just where you are rather than with food.
All right.
That is, you are coming up on that topic.
All right. And when he says, let my place be there before sundown under the tree,
right?
He has to be within 2,000 cubits of that tree, right?
Yes. He has to be within 2,000 cubits of the tree.
All right, that's it. Thanks, Rabbi.
Good questions. But yeah, this allows him to get back into the town. So Natan, you were asking before, what happens if he's outside the town and he recognizes that his zone could overlap with the town zone? Then yes, that could work, and that could get him home. Now, he would be subtracting from the other side of the town, but at least he'd be able to get back into the city itself. All right, Mishnah 8. There we go. Let's get my little scroller over there on the right, lined up for those who would like to read the explanation. Again, you can also go to the Fuchsberg Center, the conservative yeshiva in Jerusalem has all of the commentary online as well. And it's I find it a little bit more readable. It's just harder to do the cut and paste from it. But since Sefaria has it online, I feel this is elegant, and I'm getting people to use the website, which is good. Okay. If he does not recognize any tree or fence, right? He doesn't have an actual place that he can recognize. Or if he is not familiar with the halakha, right? He doesn't know that this is a loophole, if you will, that this is an option, and said, let my present position be my Shabbat place, his position acquires for him the right of movement 2,000 cubits in any direction, as we talked about. I know it would have been nice if this had come first. So if you don't know where you are, you're in the middle of nowhere, you can get 2,000 walking cubits, not carrying, but walking cubits, just by saying, this is my home for Shabbat. The question then becomes, in a circle, the words of Rabbi Hanina ben Antigonus. Right? He says, yes, you absolutely get your location, but we draw out your location as a circle, as a radius around you. But the sages say the distance are square, in the shape of a square tablet, so he may gain the area of the corners. So since we have a math teacher here, right? If you put a square around a circle, you gain the extra space at the corners. Is that correct, Natan? Exactly, right? The difference between having that, and I know this is not going to fit at all, but let's just do what I can. I'm going to have to fudge it a little bit. Let's put it like that. So if you do it based off a square, you gain all of this extra territory. And I believe I saw one calculation, and I'm not a mathematician and have not gone back and done the work to verify it, that from the center to the edge is about 2,000 cubits. from the center to the corner is about 2,800 cubits. That there's about an additional 800 cubits if you go out to the corner of a square that is around the circle. But I'll leave that to mathematicians to work out what the hypotenuse would be. So that is the bonus that is given. And again, all the way back from our first class, the sages who made the restrictions that they are now providing leniency for, well, they made the restrictions. So they're allowed to provide leniencies, including these lovely extra corners. And then, of course, this is, like I said before, all based on their analysis of the corners of the zone that was given to the Levites for the Levite cities. Okay, let's see, we can delete that, and we can delete that. Go back to mouse mode, scroll down a little bit in case anyone wants to read this in the YouTube. Oh, they even have some of the math there, although that's showing the total amount of cubits that you get. Right, a square's area is 16 million cubits. The circle's area is 12 million cubits. So Natan, when you're teaching geometry next, try and squeeze in.
Hopefully never.
What?
Hopefully never.
But if you teach geometry again, try and squeeze in a trick question about the area of a Shabbat Tehum.
Yeah.
Just as a benefit for the Jewish students in the class. Okay, Mishnah 9. And this comes back to your question, Aaron, about making it with food or not. This is what the rabbis have said. A poor man makes his eruv with his feet. Rabbi Meir said, we can apply this law to a poor man only. So the rabbis had a saying that if you are poor, you don't need food to make an eruv. And this makes a lot of sense. If you had to have food to make an eruv, then that would disqualify, unfortunately, a sizable portion of the population, especially in the ancient world. So being able to simply make a declaration that this is your spot from where you are standing or from where you are about to stand is a great leeway for those who weren't always able to enjoy the option of having time to go out and having food to go out to preset an eruv for the area. Now remember, this is for the traveling eruv, not for the moving eruv, for carrying. So Rabbi Meir says, that's right, but only poor people. If you're not poor, then you have to use food to establish the eruv. Rabbi Yehuda says, it applies to both rich and poor. They only said that an eruv is prepared with bread in order to make it easier for the rich man, so that he does not have to go out and make the eruv with his feet. So we get one of these great discussions of which way does the logic work. Is the basic logic you need food, and then they make a leniency for poor people that they can do it simply with their feet? Or is the basic position that you can do it with your feet, and they make a leniency for the rich people that they can do it with food instead of going out by themselves? By the way, the answer is from Rabbi Yehuda's position that you can, anybody, rich or poor, can establish, but using food does also work to establish as well.
But Rabbi, according to this, though, you actually have to be in the spot. And the other one, he points ahead and says,
because he is within 2,000 cubits of it and can designate it precisely. So if you're within 2,000 feet of a known landmark to you, then you can designate that landmark, if you can do it precisely, as being the center of your place, because you are already near enough to it that you are within its zone. But if you're in the middle of nowhere and didn't know anything, which was where we saw in our last Mishnah, then you designate from the place where you currently stand.
So if there was a landmark 2,000 cubits outside of a city, could you designate that your place from inside your home?
Well, you'd have to get within 2,000 cubits of it, which means you'd have to walk to the edge of the city.
All right.
Okay. Mishnah 10, yes. Come on. No, not Mishnah 11. Just, I want to roll Mishnah 10 up to the top. Good. Let's just do it that way. Okay. So now we have two towns, right? Two little villages. One who left to go to a town with which his home wished to be connected by an eruv, but a friend of his returned him home. He himself is allowed to go to the other town, but all the other town people are forbidden. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can do this verbally rather than mess about with the annotation. We've got town A. We've got town B. We have a representative from town A who is moving out to the midway point between the towns to make an eruv, so that not only he, but the people he represents, the other members of town A, can go on to visit town B on Shabbat. Everyone got it? So he's heading out, getting ready to put the eruv at that point, at the limit of the town. But on his way, his friend says, no, don't go out there. It's bad weather. It's a wild animal. There's something that prevents him from making his way to that point that he was intending to go to. After the danger is past, or whatever the problem is, he counts as having the eruv. He counts as though he was successful. The other people of the town do not. Because he failed to actually get there, he does not actually succeed in moving their zone with him. So he can go back to the other town, but the rest of the people in his original town cannot. Those are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, who wins. But there is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, which is quite different. Rabbi Meir says, whoever is able to prepare an eruv and neglected to do so is like one who is both a donkey driver and a camel driver, which, as we talked about before, this is the idiom for between a rock and a hard place, meaning that he loses the territory from the other side of the city that he wanted to give up to extend the eruv in the direction he was going, but he fails to gain the extra distance that he was hoping to get in the direction he was going. So now all he's done is make himself worse off. But like I said, Rabbi Yehuda wins this round. Of course, everyone would agree that the other townspeople, the people in town A who didn't get their eruv set by either Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Meir's opinion, they can move around the town and the full radius as normal. Okay, Mishnah 11, coming to the end of chapter 4. Come on, get that back up there. Okay. Mistake time. One who went out beyond his Shabbat limit, even 1 cubit, may not re-enter. Okay, so again, to understand this, we have to understand the way this was interpreted. This is a intentional, a willing step across the barrier, right? You are walking out towards the edge of the town, you see the markers, and you go, markers? I don't care about any markers. Watch me. And you step over the edge. Once you have done that, you are not allowed to step back into the town limits and to enjoy its freedom. You are now trapped 1 cubit out. Now, I hear you asking, even though you haven't raised your hands yet, but wait a minute. If he's only 1 cubit out, then doesn't that mean he still has cubits overlapping with his 4 cubit distance with the town that he just left, right? He hasn't fully left its zone. He's only 1 out. So even, no matter how you look at it, he has to have at least 1 amot still in the town. So how do we understand this? This is because he was going out intentionally. If you intentionally cross that line, you don't get to have a take back. You don't get to say, oh, no, just kidding. You are now outside the city. You have willingly disassociated from the town by crossing through that barrier. Rabbi Eliezer says, if he went 2 cubits beyond the Shabbat limit, he may re-enter. 3, he may not re-enter. He had a slightly more lenient interpretation. However, now we have not a case of intention, but more of mistake. One who was overtaken by dusk when only 1 cubit outside the Shabbat limit may not enter the Shabbat border, right? He's like, oh, I almost made it home, but I'm 1 cubit, I'm 18 inches from the marker. So now I'm not allowed to get back into the town. Woe is me, my life is terrible. However, Rabbi Shimon says, even if he was 15 cubits away, he may enter, since the surveyors do not measure exactly on account of those who err. Right? He has less confidence in the people who put down the markers. Because when you're putting down the marker and you're measuring out the ropes, you know, there's a little wiggle room, and there's a number of different calculations of why they end up with 15 amot based off how they hold the rope for doing the measuring. But basically what they say is, if you're within 15, you're still technically within the town limits. You made it, okay? I know it looks like you didn't, but you actually did, because they always put a little buffer at the edge.
It's very consistent with the Masechet Shabbat. If you do a mistake or you are unaware, you are not liable.
Exactly. And the first guy can't say, well, wait a minute. If there's a 15 cubit buffer zone, why am I getting punished? Right? I said I walked 1 pass, but I only walked 1 past the marker. When you just told me the markers are 15 cubits short, then that means I should be allowed to keep going and come back into the town. But no, you did it deliberately. You intentionally broke Shabbat by walking past that barrier. You do not get to rely on the leniency of the buffer.
So, Rabbi, if the wind was to like blow your kippah off, you wouldn't be able to chase it down, huh?
No.
Huh.
Your kippah is just a hat. You don't violate Shabbat for the sake of a hat. All right, and that brings us to the end of chapter 4. Very nice and neat, because chapter 5 is going to finally tell us how do you measure the size of a town. Because like I said, we've been going 2,000 amot outside the town. Where does the town end? Where are you measuring out from? Sure, it's easy if you live in a walled city, but not everybody lived in a walled city.
The last house.
So chapter 5 will answer that question.
Okay.
I have to give a little bit of a teaser for next week, you know?
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Rabbi, for the shiur.
Thank you all for coming. Remember, tomorrow is Shavuot, so there's no Pathway to Judaism class, but there is the Federation's Tikkun event. Make sure that you've gone to the Federation website, jfgo.org, and registered to get the Zoom link. If you have any trouble with that, let me know. And then we have we have streaming services at the normal time on Friday morning and Shabbat morning at 9:30 and Friday night at 7:30. Take care, everyone, and Chag Sameach.
Thank you, Chag Sameach, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.